Hip-hop is dead. Apparently. That's what a lot of people online are saying and claiming, and in this video I'm going to discuss the fact of, is it actually dead?
Do you think he's dead?
This seems like this conversation has all stemmed from the Billboard charts and the fact that the top 40 has 0 rap songs or hip-hop songs within it. And this appears to just spark some discussions amongst the community. I've seen Sean C's video talk about it, various Instagram accounts have been discussing it, and even my own community in the Discord have started, like, the question has popped up and even started discussing it there. So I thought it would be a good time to kind of throw my 2 pennies in there to basically get some of my thoughts and opinions on this topic. And straight off the bat, I am just going to say this. Hip-hop is not dead whatsoever. Like, if you just look past, just like, 2024 was a huge year for hip-hop, and it proves why hip-hop will never die, and that's simply due to the fact of Kendrick, Drake, and the whole beef that went on there and how that kind of, like, took over. Not just to the point of, like, Kendrick basically being just like everywhere with the song Not Like Us, but more in the sense of like it felt like that started a little bit of a movement in terms of like maybe actually the right word is actually more of a shift in how we kind of like present hip-hop and how the genre itself actually comes across. And it had a little bit of a domino effect into Joey Badass, Absol. I'd say that's a little bit more of a niche thing in terms of hip-hop, but 2024 was a huge year for hip-hop. And then to carry it on into 2025, we have had some really good albums come out this year that definitely shouldn't be slept on. Like, we've had Clips drop, we've had Tyler the Creator drop, we've had Lil Sims drop, Freddie Gibbs has dropped, Jid dropped an album, and I mean, to be honest, I think one of the ones that is getting slept on quite a lot is the fact that we've got the entire Mass Appeal lot doing their whole 7 albums this year that have honestly been so far all really good. We just received the Big L album, and I think considering that it's someone who's been dead for about 20 years, they pulled off a really good project. And like this year, we have had really good albums that have all been pretty solid for the most part. And I mean, a lot of people would actually include Playboi Carti in there. I think definitely for the moment, it was really good. As an album, I think it's like you either love it or you hate it. So to straight away answer the question, hip-hop is not dead, it is alive, it is still thriving. It's just maybe not doing as good as it was, say, compared to the last year. It's like pretty much comparing the biggest event of hip-hop in the last, let's say, decade maybe, and comparing that to the next year where you don't have that giant bomb going off. Like you can't really fairly compare the 2 years because of everything that's happened. If anything, I would probably argue that the albums and quality we've had this year come out have been much better than the 2024 year. And to be fair, I think 2024 GNX, I would call like an actual classic album, and it was a big release. And that's what I feel is missing from hip-hop at the moment. There are no real big releases, and that's what I feel like is missing from hip-hop slash not making it die, but maybe making it feel a bit more irrelevant than maybe it has done over the past few years or just even in general. And whilst I speak about Kendrick and Drake, I think that's an important time to bring up the big 3, because if we go before 2024, right, we had the big 3 being Kendrick, Cole, and Drake. These 3 guys essentially are the guys who carried the 2010s decade, and they are the guys who would drop the blockbuster albums. And whether you were a massive fan of hip-hop or you were just a fan of hip-hop in a more casual sense, you knew that if one of these guys dropped, you had to go over to listen to them no matter what genre you're actually into. And during all that time period, it was like you would get a Kendrick album and then you'll be fed for a little while. After that, you'll get a Drake album, you'll be fed for a little while. Then you'll get a Cole album and you'll be fed a little while. And they made sure those like order may just like mix up every once in a while, but that's the kind of feeling that I felt like the 2010s had with hip-hop. You had great albums in between all of those from different artists, but then when you needed those blockbuster release, then those guys would kind of step in. And that's not to say they're the exclusive like blockbuster albums or anything, but they are the best examples in terms of that sort of superstardom that is within rap. However, if we go post 2024, what we find ourselves with is there is no big 3 anymore. Personally, I think it is fair to say that at the start of the 2020s, we found ourselves kind of understanding that Drake, Cole, and Kendrick are all in the kind of like later years of their careers and moving their careers along to be, if not the retirement phase, then kind of like the easing out, taking a step back kind of phase. And in my personal opinion, we now find ourselves with one of those guys who is making not the music you would kind of expect from them to be making, and when they do release that music, it's not tending to hit the same as it once did, despite the fact they study rap battles for a living.
I study rap battles for a living.
The other one just seems to have just ran away to the mountains and is just chilling there now. And if we are being honest, whilst I do think he took the kind of like right route of actually just dipping from the beef, he kind of lost a lot of aura for the fact that he kind of injected himself into it first and then kind of backtracked a bit. That kind of hurt his sort of like stance, in my opinion. And then the last one is kind of now all on him to almost carry the genre in a way. And the problem with him is, when you compare him at least to the guy he was beefing with, if we're being fair, he does not drop as often as that other guy and doesn't really provide that kind of music that is really going to be that sort of like blockbuster sound. And granted, in his last album, I think he did provide a lot of that, and he is known for his hits too. But I think when you compare the two in terms of their regularity of how they would drop their music, Kendrick isn't necessarily that guy who has always been there to like drop heavily, say year after year even. And I think 2024 is a massive exception to that, because we did get him dropping like 3 or 4 different disses just back to back, and then shortly followed on a few months with a new album. This could age terribly, and maybe when it gets to the 1 year mark he's going to drop the deluxe for it, but that deluxe has been rumored since that album dropped. But the point I'm trying to get at is Kendrick has never been the guy to drop super regularly in terms of like the music. He likes to take his time and craft his music, which is absolutely fair. So now, because he's almost like the only guy left standing there, it almost feels like he's the one that everyone's relying on to kind of carry hip-hop in a way, in terms of like getting like everyone across the music scene on board to go and listen to a project more than anything. And it's kind of a thing of, if he fumbles, then who else do we have? Which then puts the whole genre in this weird stalemate. But if we look past the big three, another thing that is kind of like popping up quite a lot is the people who are releasing the better projects at the moment are either guys who are like in their 50s or just legend status. Like, if we think about it, this year we have had like some of the best projects have been, say, we'll take all the Mass Appeal guys already. Like, sure, maybe they haven't had like the biggest like commercial success, but if you go and listen to each individual album they've made, they've been really good. If we look past just like 2025 as well, you could argue that for the 2020s, Nas has been a big like component of how well those albums have been doing in terms of carrying hip-hop. Like, his whole King's Disease series I think has been super successful. Magic maybe not like the most standout, but it has still been really good. And again, Nas is actually dropping this year, and he's probably one of our most anticipated albums for the year. We even had like a brand new Wu-Tang album this year, of course Clips as well. Like, there are a lot of these like older sort of like legend status kind of guys who are still making really good music, and they're the ones who are almost like carrying the flag for hip-hop. And I think one of the benefits for that is it's almost like those guys, like, I'd even say like Eminem's album last year. I'm a big fan of Eminem. Currently right here there's a whole stack of Eminem vinyl records that I'm waiting to film a whole video on for my collection. Anyway, whilst I wouldn't say it had the best longevity for the Death of Slim Shady, he still had a really good standout project last year and kind of like brought his name back into relevance with that project. And again, obviously he still continues to smash the records for album sales in rap and hip hop. And even if it's not a successful album in people's opinions, then he's still making the massive conversation when it comes to his releases. And for that, I think all those guys have done really good to kind of like show us that there is longevity for these artists who want to go into hip-hop. It's not just a young man's sport like Andre 3000 might claim it is, though I think he is correct in some aspects of his argument. But it has shown through all these guys that hip-hop can be a long-standing thing if you really try it. But the problem that these guys have had is, whilst they still continue to be really good at what they do, I don't think they've really tried to like pass the torch to anyone. And like, if we take Lil Wayne for example, I think he's probably the best example of this. He has been the guy to like, he's at legend status now. Sure, the Carter 6, it is what it is, but he's still made an effort almost at his peak to pass the torch to someone to carry his legacy. And not just one person, he made a whole label out of it. And those, at least 2 of those people have actually gone on to, fair enough, carry a decent legacy in Drake and Nicki Minaj. And if we take Wayne away from the equation and we just look at everything else, it feels like to me we now have the new generation of artists and rappers in hip-hop kind of just like, they'll drop a really good album as their first release, or they'll just have like a really good hit that like gets all on the radio, is being played everywhere. They do something to essentially get like their career started, but then it just feels like as soon as it starts, it stops. Like, to me, it almost feels like they've like started their career and instead of going on to the next album, they almost get infatuated with another project, which is completely understandable, but it does make you feel like rap just becomes a bit more of a gateway to the wider industry for them. Like, I love wrestling, and I'm going to use this as my kind of like little metaphor, but it's almost quite like how The Rock came into wrestling, right? Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson came in, he became a mega star in wrestling, and then just kind of like, he wasn't there for that long, and then just dipped and went to Hollywood and started making movies, and that became his passion and what he was interested in, and kind of left wrestling for at least over a decade. And that's kind of how I see some of these recent people who have come into rap. Like, they've kind of just used it as a gateway. Like, if we look at Jack Harlow, he almost instantly, I think it was like White Men Can't Jump, or he did like the reversion of that. He did that. Then you have like Baby Keem kind of like moved on to almost make a visual film more than anything. And it feels like there's a fair few of these guys who are kind of just using hip hop more as a stepping stone to move their career along and get to where they really want to be. And I have a much wider point that I kind of want to use this to address. And again, what I'm going to use to show this point is wrestling. Because honestly, I see wrestling as a really good representation of hip hop. If you know these guys, you know them. If you don't, please bear with me. So in wrestling, we have these guys called main eventers. These are the guys that you can put on the top of your card for the match card that you have for the show you're going to do, and they will be the ones that like people will pay money to see. In today's modern world of the WWE, I would probably say Cody Rhodes, Roman Reigns, CM Punk. That's a good main event example. You'll then have your legends who do a little bit of a legends run. Maybe it's their retirement year. So for example, John Cena. Another legend, for example, right now would be Rey Mysterio too. Then you have your mid-carders who are kind of like there week to week. They're doing like really good matches, carrying the kind of like mid-card championships like US title. So Ilya Dragunov at the moment, Dominic Mysterio as well. Like, these are guys who are basically like, they're a bit younger and they're trying to like build their way up to basically become main event guys eventually. And then you kind of have your like lower card, which are basically just guys who are always there, but they're kind of there to almost like just take the loss to make your other guys look stronger. That's almost a very short example of how wrestling works in terms of the levels that there are to it. And I think this can really be applied to hip hop. You have your main eventers, the guys who people are always going to buy the albums of, who are always going to be checked out. And a good example would be Kendrick, Drake, and Cole. These are the guys who can drop a project once every 3 years and it's going to be massive. And I think one of the benefits that helps with those guys is it didn't always work like consecutively every year. You'd get a Cole project and then a Drake project in the next year and then a Kendrick project the next. But it does help kind of like fill in the gaps where the guy who's working on their 3-year process to make the next album, whilst they're spending those 2 years to make the next one of the other two, they can then fill in that gap to kind of like keep the audience fed throughout that time. Your legends at this point in time, I think a good example is the Mass Appeal lot. Like, these are legends just having like one last album, having a bit more fun with it and just kind of like doing it for the sake of the game. I'd include like Eminem and Lil Wayne in there too. Basically guys who are going to be a bit more of a like nostalgia act. That's what I kind of consider legends to be at this point in time for rap and hip hop. Then you have your mid-carders who are kind of trying to build their way up, and I'm not sure the best examples to include here. The people I've kind of written down at the moment are Roddy Ricch, Baby Keem, Jack Harlow, Denzel Curry, JID. These are guys who should be, in my opinion, I'm not saying like you need to drop an album every 1 to 2 years, but I feel like that's a fair time frame for when you should be expecting like those kind of like middle kind of like building their way up guys to be making their projects. Just dropping something every 1 to 2 years, I think, is kind of a good kind of regularity for them. Then you kind of have your lower card people who are guys and girls who are just dropping maybe even every year, but it's just like they'll have a good hit every once in a while that kind of like bumps the numbers up and kind of keeps stuff going, because to have really good stuff, you have to have really bad stuff. And that's where you'll probably put someone like, I don't know, Ice Spice. Some people might say like Lil Tecca, I don't know. Kind of that sphere of rappers. Although I will say I still do love you, Tecca. The lower card for hip hop and rap are those guys and girls who are just dropping for the sake of dropping. That's all they are. And where we see ourselves in rap and hip hop right now is our main eventers are now becoming legends. They're moving into that legend status and going through that process. And one of the things that happens in wrestling is those main eventers will tend to like pass the torch to someone to then kind of like, for example, like obviously wrestling is predetermined sport. If Cody Rhodes were to get pinned by, let's say in the example to carry on what I've been talking about, if he was pinned by Ilya Dragunov, that ups Ilya Dragunov's stock to then almost be considered on a main event level. That's kind of how it should kind of work in hip-hop as well. I'm not saying that like Kendrick has to then lose a beef to say Roddy Ricch or something for Roddy Ricch to then become a main eventer, but if Kendrick were then to find a guy or someone he thought was like really good, and that's kind of what's missing from hip-hop in my opinion. Like these guys who are main eventers, they are in the phase of moving into the legend status. However, before they've moved there, they haven't really left the door open to someone to come and fit into their slot. And if I'm being completely blunt, I do not think the mid-carders of hip-hop right now are either ready enough or good enough to become main eventers, leaving us with a missing generation. Now, what I'm about to discuss might be a little bit more sensitive, but I am just going to bring it up because I think it's a fair point that I haven't really seen discussed in many places that I've checked anyway. It might have done, do correct me if I'm wrong, but I am not saying that these guys I'm about to mention would have been the new big three or anything, but it is a fact that they were on a rise, they were becoming superstars, but in the nicest way, these guys I'm about to mention, they were all on their way to becoming, if not becoming, already being, main event status to at least carry up to the mid-2020s, where we're at now, potentially longer. And I'm in no way saying these would be the big three, but the three I am going to pull out is going to be Mac Miller, Juice Wrld, and Pop Smoke. And someone else who I think is worth mentioning because I think they would have really represented the West Coast, Nipsey Hussle. In my opinion, these were guys who, whether you like their sound of music or not, they're all very different kind of like versions of hip-hop, but whether you like them or not, they were all the guys who were kind of like carrying the flag and waving it for hip-hop. And now, none of those guys are here, and I think you can fairly bring up a load of other names who have tragically passed away. I mean, XXX Tentacion, like, personally I don't really like the kind of person he was. I feel like maybe he was trying to change at the end of things, but regardless of that, his music was definitely taken off too. Lil Peep is another guy, and I think it's fair to say that maybe if these guys hadn't have died, maybe their stocks wouldn't be as big as they are, because obviously the biggest thing that can happen to an artist is they pass away and their music instantly then starts getting even more streams than they've ever seen before. That could be a side effect of this, but I think it's safe to say that even before their deaths, they were taken off to a point where they could have been the next guys and the next flag bearers for hip-hop as a genre. And because none of them are here, it's left us with this like gap that isn't being filled in terms of this like blockbuster style releases. And before you say anything, I know Mac Miller has dropped at least like 2 Postmorphous albums through his team, and same with Juice Wrld too. But these albums would not have played the same if the guys who made them hadn't passed away already. So this generation that we are missing are a generation of main event superstars to carry hip hop. And to go a little deeper, 2 of those guys I mentioned, they were being trained or essentially like learning from their mentors who had carried the 2000s. And ironically, those 2 mentors are best mates, and that is 50 Cent and Eminem. Like, Eminem basically took Juice Wrld under his wing just before he passed away, and almost felt like he found a guy who he could like trust with rap and hip hop, because he was so infatuated with how Juice Wrld was able to freestyle the way he did. And clearly Juice Wrld learned a lot from Eminem and took a lot of inspiration from him, and Eminem had clearly been passing that knowledge to him, and unfortunately he passed away before they could really even get going to do anything. And obviously since then Eminem's kind of been involved with the Fighting Demons skit he did, and always feels like he has a bit of a connection to Juice WRLD's legacy now, particularly with him working with Cole Bennett for at least 2 of his music videos now. And then on the other side of that, you also have 50 Cent with Pop Smoke, who Pop Smoke took a lot of like lessons from 50. There's the infamous clip online of 50 Cent talking about Pop Smoke and how like he thought he wasn't listening to him when they would like met each other. Turns out Pop Smoke was just making a bunch of notes on his list of everything 50 was like just telling him so he could learn from 50. And then 50 Cent even had a massive production credit on the Postmorphous album that dropped for Pop Smoke. And we can never say what would have happened if these guys had continued to live and make their music, but I definitely think they would have been at least capable of filling in this kind of like gap that we are now finding ourselves with. And they could have been really vital for keeping the conversation of hip hop alive, as well as acting as the connection between the older legend sort of generation to the new up and coming generation. And now with those lot gone, it feels like the new generation are kind of stuck and a bit lost, where they'll drop one album And then they might be a little bit, I think there's a lot more of a discussion that goes on here because I think social media plays a massive part in how new generation artists are kind of like creating their music and like outputting their art, which I think is a discussion we should save for another time. But they'll drop that one album and then they'll dip. And to me personally, I think this whole like passing down the torch, mentorship is something that is a true art form that was kind of major in rap. And it's an art form that's almost been lost due to this. I'll take it back to the big three to kind of like re-bring up this point. But with Kendrick, right, on GNX, he very clearly went into it trying to put more eyes onto a newer generation of rappers in particularly the LA scene, which is a really good way to kind of like go about things. However, unfortunately, I couldn't honestly tell you, like the name that first pops out of that list is Dodie Six, but outside of that, the only feature that like really stood out and kind of like made like their feature their own is SZA, and she's not exactly up and coming. So Kendrick in a way kind of failed to find the next guy. Although, to be fair, he has brought Baby Keem along with him, and I think that's someone who Kendrick has looked at to almost pass his torch to, and I think that's probably the best example we can really give to Kendrick. But then Baby Keem's like, instead of like, sure, take some time to go away and make a really good project next, but how long's that been now? Like 5 years if it's 2019? Was it 2019 that album dropped? I can't remember. But he's been missing in action for a little while now, and really, we should at least have 2 studio albums from the guy. Drake is an interesting one because I think we all know the phrase the Drake stimulus package, like, because he is a guy who has raised people's stocks and basically been a booster pack to start rappers' careers. He's never necessarily found that one guy to kind of like take with him or kind of like try and teach. Although I think it's fair to say that he has a lot of influence in, again, what I was talking about, like he's given all these guys and girls like great ways to start their career, but I don't feel like he's ever found one person to almost like help grow. And seemingly he's never stuck around enough to like help young upcoming rappers because he's probably too busy out grooming young girls instead. Then you have J. Cole, who I think the best example for J. Cole is obviously he's given a whole label of like guys a chance. I think the standout from there is probably JID. And JID has like all the skills you would want as a rapper. And honestly, out of this entire generation, I think he's probably like the most skilled one out there. But there's just something about JID that I feel like he's always going to be like, to go back to the wrestling sort of metaphor, he's always going to be a guy who's going to be carrying like, he's going to be the workhorse of hip hop and rap. He'll always like carry and have like great songs and great like skill and lyricism, but he's never going to be able to reach that sort of like main event status. So I don't know if Cole's really found the guys that almost like take his spot. So this kind of next statement is kind of to like go to everyone who is not just a part of the big three, anyone who's kind of like got a level to them in rap. They need to make more of an effort to find younger talent, find these guys, help mentor them, and just work with the next generation and just help raise their stock and bring them up. So then when they do become mid-card guys, they can then eventually feel like they can fit into that sort of main event slot. And I think there should be more effort to go out and search for and find these kind of talents because they are out there. If Jimmy Iovine's team had never gone to the Rap Olympics, Dr. Dre would never be aware of who Marshall Mathers is, and we would never have an Eminem. And he took over the game in the early 2000s. The talent to be the main event level guys is out there, and I think that's what's scary because it's out there, but the teams aren't looking because they're too busy now kind of almost putting their reliance on AI. And that's a whole separate conversation. I think the final point I do want to raise in this is like to almost bring it back to what I was saying about like, say if Kendrick dropped, you could then rely on Cole to drop next, Drake to drop next, and kind of like fill this gap in when you would get smaller projects, but then these guys would kind of like carry the kind of like blockbusters. This could just be because time's had an effect. In 20 years, you kind of like forget the kind of like clutter and you kind of like reminisce on the best projects. But from what I can see, if you were to look at like the early 2000s, it felt like it wasn't on just like one or even just 3 guys to kind of like rely on to drop music. It did feel like you could like go to one person and then rely on them for a bit of a blockbuster release. Then a couple months or a year later, you then get someone else do it. You then have someone else do it a year later as well. Like there was so many projects coming out that seem like classics now. And to kind of list off a little bit, like you would have say like Snoop Dogg, then you'd have Dr. Dre, then you'd have Eminem, then you'd have Exhibit, then you'd have 50 Cent come out of it. Jay-Z as well, Lil Kim, Outkast as well. Like I'm just like listing off a few names there that like, I'm not saying that we don't have like 7 different names we can rely on and talent for right now, but in terms of like the albums and output that was going on back in the 2000s, it feels like we're not getting that kind of output anymore. And maybe that's for the best, maybe that's for the worst. In summary, hip-hop is not dead, and it isn't actually dying. It's just missing a very big key part of itself, which is those big releases. And my 2 pennies that I'm throwing in is because we are missing a big portion of a generation who could have been filling that gap of the big releases. And with that all said, make sure to leave a like on the video if you did agree with my opinion or you have any other differing ones. Go in the comments and let me know what those opinions are, because I am genuinely curious. Like, this is a massive discussion going on. So getting you guys and me involved, I think it's really healthy to do, and to kind of like get the differing opinions that is going on about, is hip-hop dead? Subscribers who are new, I have a massive vinyl hip-hop collection I love to talk about. I also love talking about hip-hop itself. So if you do like that, subscribe. We're on the road to 3,000 subscribers by the end of the year. We're about less than 400 away now, so your help is appreciated. And without further ado, I've been Ollie, and I shall see you in the next one. Don't forget, it is never too late until it's too late, and I shall see you later. Goodbye.